We're on Eastern time, so we're a little bit behind or ahead, I should say. Um, but yeah, good to be here. Victoria, do you want me to go ahead and get started, or did you? I don't know if you had any like announcements or anything that you wanted to make before.
Oh, yeah, you can just go get started. It's all good. Everything's on recording, so.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Josue Jimenez. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions at Duke Law. And really, these are, I'm trying to do these, kind of informal. So any questions that you have, if you want to have your video on, feel free, but we're recording, so if you want to have it off, that's fine too. But yeah, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get to them at the end. And if not, you can raise your hand at the end and I'll answer them then as well. So what I'm gonna do first is kind of give you a brief overview about the program itself, Durham, talking a little bit about Durham, where we are located in North Carolina, and then a little bit about our application process and financial aid process as well. And hopefully that answers some of your questions, and then we can get into any more specific questions that you may have. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'd like to start off with is kind of give you an idea of where our students come from and where students go to as far as employment goes. And so as you can see, we're a fairly national school and really international school when it comes to where our students are coming from, their hometowns, and where they go to after graduating from here. So here's a breakdown of the current first year class, the class of 2026. Pretty evenly spread. Midwest is always kind of on the lower side. So if you have any Midwesterners, feel free to join. We're always looking to increase that number. Interestingly, this year was actually the first year that's not represented here because from the region, the Northeast was still the highest represented region, but for the first time ever, California was the most represented home state for the current first year class, which is something that we're excited about as well. As you can see of where our students go, we haven't finalized the data for the class of 2023 yet. They're still our careers, so they're still working on that. But this is pretty consistent year to year when it comes to the top three spots of where students tend to go for work. So class of 2022, almost a third of the class went to New York, and then you have DC and California. Within California, the majority go to either LA or the LA area or the Bay Area. So those are the top two spots within that state. As far as what type of jobs our students tend to go to, so here, law firms obviously very generic and vague. So that's actually private practice is what we mean by law firms. Of that percentage, the majority of the students go to what's considered a big law firm, basically just like a national law firm. Usually they have hundreds, if not thousands, of attorneys across the country and across the world. So that's just what a lot of our students choose to do. Then followed by clerkships. So clerkships is pretty steady, I would say, on average, anywhere between 12 to 20% of our classes has to do a clerkship, and that includes both federal and state clerkships. If you're not sure what a clerkship is, that's okay. I was a first year college student. When I got to law school, that's when I found out what a clerkship was. So really quickly, basically a clerkship, the reason why a lot of students want to do it is if you ever see yourself, down the line wanting to become a judge, it's not a requirement, particularly for state courts, but most federal judges clerked at some point in their career. So that's why a lot of students that are thinking at some point down the line they might want to do there. Oftentimes law professors, they clerked as well. And it just opens up a lot of doors because what it is you're in essence working with the judge for typically a year, 2 year fellowship or clerkship. And you're helping them do research for their cases. You're sitting on the oral arguments. Normally it's in an appellate level court. You're helping them draft their opinions on the cases. And so you're really building the research and writing skill set that firms and federal government agencies want from their attorneys. So that's why it opens up a lot of doors because they know that if you were a clerk, that you have this experience and then you have developed this skill set. And of course, it gives you the network of the judge that you're working for. So it gives you a lot of connections, which in every profession, having a good network is important, but especially in the legal profession, who you know is just as important as what you know. So that's the reason why a lot of students are looking at clerkships that see themselves going that route down the line. And then we have the government public interest. We have students that straight from law school decide that they want to pursue a public interest or a government career. And so we do have some students that decide to do that. a lot of our students that go the private practice route at some point become government attorneys or public interest attorneys. It's just that a smaller percentage of students decide to go straight into it. And I'll talk a little bit more about the support system that we have for those students, just because typically those types of positions don't pay as much as private practice positions do. And so although we are a national school, we're a pretty small, relatively speaking, school. Our class size target is between 220 and 230 each year. And so what we do is we break that up into about 7 sections. And so that's your small section for your first year. And so for 2 out of your 4 classes, you're going to be with that section. For the third class, we actually combine you with another section in your class just to give you an opportunity to get to know your classmates and someone else outside of your section. And then for the fourth class, your legal research and writing class, you're actually broken up into even smaller groups of about 20 to 25 students, because that one is a lot more interactive, more involved, and you have more sometimes weekly, but usually at least monthly assignments that you have to submit for that. That's why you break them up into smaller groups. So it's fairly small. And then once you get to your upper level courses, depending on how specific the area of law is, they can get fairly small. You can have classes as small as 10, 15 people. Our clinics, I'll talk a little bit more about them later, but those are also capped as well because they want to keep them small. So you do have a really good opportunity to get to know all of your classmates and build strong relationships with your professors as well. And so a little bit about Durham. Like you saw, most of our students that come here, they're not from the area. Many of them have never been to the area until they came here for either like our Admitted Students Weekend or get here for orientation. And so they're just not familiar with it. So that's why I like to talk a little bit about Durham. And so really, I'm originally from LA, so bigger city. And then I moved here after a while. And so I've been here for about 10 years now. But what I tell students is Durham is kind of like a large town for people that are maybe from more rural areas. It's a small city, and so it just kind of depends on your perspective. But it has that balance, and I think that's really what our students appreciate about Durham is it's obviously not a major city where you have to worry about traffic, cost of living, and all these other things that come with a big city. But at the same time, it's not a college town where you're limited to campus and not much outside of that. So there's plenty of things to do off campus, which is something that we encourage our students to do, to get away from school, have a work-life balance, and forget about school for a little bit. And so they take opportunities to explore the area. Of course, Durham is part of what's called the Triangle area. And so you have Raleigh, which is the capital of North Carolina, right next door, which is a little bit bigger city. And then you have Chapel Hill on the other side, which is where I went to undergrad. And for those of you that don't know, UNC and Duke are big rivals. But that is more what you would think of a college town environment. So even if you kind of wanted to get away and experience those two things, you have that right next door to us. And where we are located within the state, we're about 2 hours away from the beach, about 3 hours from the mountains. So our second and third year students don't have Friday classes. Our first year students only have Friday morning classes. So if you wanted to go out and explore and enjoy the scenery that North Carolina provides, you can definitely have that as well. And if you want a bigger city type of vibe for a weekend or something like that, or if you're on a fall break or spring break, DC is only about a 3.5, 4 hour drive. So we're not too far from a bigger city if that's kind of the environment you want to have for a little bit. So it's a great city. It's a rapidly growing area. A lot of people are coming out here. There's just a lot of research opportunities. A lot of businesses, startup companies are coming here, and major corporations. So recently, Apple and Amazon announced that they're going to be setting up some of their HQs here as well. So that's the big thing that's coming to the area. And so a little bit about our current class and our affinity groups and diversity that we have here. So here you see the demographics for our first year class, current first year class. And this has become pretty average year to year, at least for the last 3, 4 years, where our average age is 24, our age range is pretty wide. So for example, for this class, it's 20 to 35. For the second year class, it's 20 to 55. So that can fluctuate a little bit more. Students of color scored 9%, first year in college, 12%. And for the last 3 or 4 years, it's been consistently the majority of our classes have been made up of students that identify as women, as you can see here. And here you see some of our affinity group student organizations as well. And those vary quite widely. So you have, politically affiliated, religiously affiliated, race, ethnicity, gender identity. So you have a wide variety when it comes to that. This is only part of our student organizations. In total, we have about like 70 different student organizations. So this is just a few. And the other organizations vary based on area of law that you might be interested in, like our business law society or environmental law society. But we also have just kind of general interests that have nothing to do with laws, but just for fun. So like our running club, we have a lifting club as well. So something that you can do with a group of students here that aren't just in your class, but that also has nothing to do with law school, just kind of as an outlet. So that's something that we encourage our students to do. One that's kind of unique that I didn't have when I was in, I went to a different law school. So I thought it was fun when I saw it here is we have an improv student organization. So if you're into acting or would like to develop some acting skills, you can do that. They put on a show every spring semester as a fundraiser, and they do different sketches and things like that. So I thought that was pretty interesting when I started working here. So a little bit about public interest. I mentioned earlier that there is a support system for those students that do want to do public interest work or government work. And so one of the things that we do in the beginning of the year is a public interest retreat. And so here you see the dean speaking to the students. So you'll have the dean, faculty, and we have an office of public service and pro bono. And so the staff members there were all public interest attorneys prior to coming here. And so they, in essence, serve as your career advisors. The Career Center, when you get here, you will get assigned a career advisor. But if you say, I'm interested in doing public interest work, you'll also be connected with the Office of Public Interest and Pro Bono because they'll be able to advise you a little bit better when it comes to those types of positions, just because the hiring process for those types of roles is different from the private practice roles. So they want to make sure that you're aware of those opportunities and how to prepare for those opportunities. The other things is funding. You know, most of these positions are either, especially the summer positions, are either not paid at all or very low paid. So Duke actually provides funding for those summer opportunities, not to the level of private practice, but at least helps pay the bills so that you don't have to say no to an opportunity that you really want to do just because of the financial aspect of it. So there is help there. There's also assistance after you graduate with the loan repayment assistance program. So what Duke does is if you make below a certain amount, they update it every few years, but if you make below a certain amount in a public interest or government position, they will actually make your student loan payment for you for the duration of 10 years. And so at the 10-year mark, so part of the requirement is that you enroll in the public service loan forgiveness program in the income-based repayment plan. So once the 10 years is up, they help you apply for the public service loan forgiveness program, and then that gets forgiven. And so that's why there's that 10-year cap. It's not that they cut it off and that's it. They wait until you get approved for that. So you do have that opportunity to kind of help offset. And of course, if you exceed the amount, they'll prorate it. It's not like a hard cutoff. So they might not be paying for all of it during the entire 10 years, but they may still be paying for a portion of your student loan payments as your salary increases throughout your career. And so we do have a lot of experiential learning opportunities as well. So we have, these are all the clinics that we have currently. We have externship programs as well. One that's a little bit different is the Duke in DC program. So the easiest way to explain that one is you're studying abroad in DC for a semester. And so our students that take advantage of that program are mainly students that want to do like government type of work or some type of public interest opportunity, and they want to spend some time in DC. We also have some students that know that after law school, they just want to be in DC for work. So they take advantage of that opportunity as well. And so for students that do want to, like that do know that they want to be in DC after graduation, what they'll do is oftentimes they'll either do the Duke and DC program their spring semester of their 2 year or the fall semester of their 3 year, because what that allows them to do is to also spend the summer in DC at an internship or a summer associate position if you're doing the private practice route. So that way you can actually extend your time in DC to a semester in the summer and not just a semester. So you do have the opportunity to do that if you know that that's a place where you want to be after graduation. We also have skills-based class just because we have a good blend of students. Some students want to do transactional work or basically work that where they don't have to be in the courtroom if they don't have to be. And we have some other students that want to live in the courtroom. So if you're in the middle, you can take all of them, or if you have one way or another, then we have classes for you. So here you see classes on like negotiation, contract drafting, arbitration, mediation is a big one too. Of course, we have mock trial, moot court teams that compete. So you have that opportunity if you kind of want to get more experience in the courtroom. We have a courtroom in the law school that they use. And then, of course, we have elective courses based on trial advocacy. So you can kind of fine tune those skills if you don't necessarily want to be part of the teams, but you still want to develop that skill set. You can take those classes as well. And so journals. So journals is something that's different in law school as well. Some law schools only have one, others have a variety like we do. And they all kind of do their process a little bit differently as far as how you get on. We do have a writing competition for that. Typically, you do it right after your first year. And then when you submit your writing sample, you also submit your order of preference of journals. So you put in which ones you want. From my conversations with students on journals, if you put more than one, you're going to have a strong likelihood that you get selected for one of them. If you only put one, then it's going to be a little bit tougher because you're counting on just that one. So, you do have the opportunity to do multiple if you want to, but this is very time consuming work. So the thing about law school is you really have to learn how to manage your time. So if you decide, journal is what I want to do, and you want to do two of them, then you're going to have to limit how involved you are in like student organizations or clinics or pro bono work. So this is something that they'll have info sessions during your first year so you can get a better sense of how much time it's going to take and the type of work that you're going to do in those journals. So that way, before you go through the process of applying or doing the writing competition, you have a good idea of what you're going to be doing. And the reason why a lot of people do journals is talking about clerkships earlier. A lot of judges, because you're going to be doing a lot of research and writing, want to see that you have that experience. And so judges know that if you were on a journal, that you have to do that because a lot of the work that you will be doing is research and writing focused. And so because of that, a lot of judges will require some journal experience to be considered for a clerkship with them. And so that's why a lot of students do journals because it does open up a lot of doors if the clerkship route is what you want to do. And even if you don't, but you want to go the big law route, that helps with that too. So that's why journals tend to be popular too. And so research centers. So research centers are actually a little bit different because they're not just centered around the law school. So there are law faculty there. As a law student, you can work there as a research assistant, but there are interdisciplinary. So you are involving other departments, other professionals. So for example, one of my most popular ones is the Wilson Center for Science and Justice. They do a lot of criminal justice reform work. They also evaluate, do analysis on criminal justice reform laws and do studies to see if they're having the intended effect. Sometimes they join in on litigation as like an amicus brief, for example. They've done that. Sometimes they do their own studies. And so as a law student, you get to work in that center as a research assistant. And you're not just working with law faculty, but you're also working with like social workers or therapists or other activists in the community. So it's different because you're not just working with law faculty and law students. So you do have that opportunity to work in a more interdisciplinary approach to things. And so a little bit about the process in general. And so here you see kind of a general outline or timeline of what it looks like for us. So our application always opens up in September. The deadline is always pretty much mid-February. So for us, today is the deadline for our general application deadline. And typically that's when it is. And so schools vary on this. Some schools, their general application deadline isn't until May. So, you definitely make sure you're paying attention to whatever schools are your top schools to those specific dates. Here you also see our percentiles for the current first year class. What I tell students is just because, of course, numbers are a big part of the consideration process. What I tell students is use these as guideposts and not as dictators of where you apply. What I mean by that is don't just assume, oh, I'm below the median, I'm not getting in. Like that's not how it works. If you haven't heard of it already, you're gonna hear about it a lot more. And that's the holistic process of the review process. And what that means is sometimes people think that means that everything's weighed equally, and it's not. So what it means is we consider a variety, and everything that's included in your application, we consider, and that's a variety of things. But the numbers are still going to carry a big weight to it. So it's not that everything's weighed equally, it's just that we consider everything as a whole. And so just because you're below the medians or below the 25th percentiles, it does not mean that you're automatically going to get denied or waitlisted, because if everything else is strong, you can overcome those lower numbers. And on the flip side, if you're above the 75th percentiles on both numbers, that does not guarantee admission, because if everything else is not that good, or it's apparent to us, which it often is, that you didn't put that much effort into it and you're relying on those numbers, we have zero problems waitlisting and denying people, because we're in a fortunate position where we have a lot of great applicants, and that those statements are really the kind of distinguishing factors when it comes to applications. And so, like I said, have an idea. So like if okay, below the median on both GPA and LSAT, I really got to make sure that everything else is as strong as possible. And I got to take advantage of the opportunities the school gives me to write these statements, to give them more about myself so that they have more to work with than just the numbers and like a personal statement. So for example, with us, we have a personal statement opportunity. We also have a short answer requirement where you have to do at least one, no more than two short answers. We have 6 different questions that you can pick from. They're actually on our website, so feel free to check them out if you want to kind of get an idea of what we ask. So, you will want to do 2. And then we have the optional essay where we talk about why law or why Duke. And so you would want to do that too, because again, if you know that you're coming in and the numbers are already a disadvantage, you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of every other opportunity to make up for those lower numbers. And like I said, on the flip side, you still want to make sure that that personal statement is good, that it's substantive, and it makes sense, and that it shows that you put at least a little bit of effort. You don't necessarily have to do every single thing. If you want to, great, and you want to highlight different aspects of yourself, that's great. But just make sure that you're not just assuming that you're going to get in either. That's the biggest thing that I tell students when it comes to that. Resume, I mean, overall, it's pretty standard. Just do it in like chronological, like what you're doing currently first, and then go work your way up. For some reason, this year and last year, we've seen an increase in ones where start with like the oldest first, and then they go down. So I'm having to like scroll to get to what you're doing now, and that's what we like to start with when we're reviewing an application. The other thing is pictures. We don't necessarily need to make it as efficient as possible for the reader to get through your application, because normally we're spending anywhere between 15, maybe 20 minutes in an application. If it's a really good one, a little bit more. If it's not that great, a little less. So you want to make sure that everything is as easy to find as possible. So the biggest thing, not just resume, but every other aspect, is you want to label things, because that really helps us out to figure out what am I reading. Because sometimes, especially if you're going, the way that we see things is just one long PDF. And so if I get to the short answer, and there was never a label for personal statement or short answer, and there's no distinction, and it just continues, and then the subject just changes, I'm like, wait, is it the short answer, or is it still part of the personal statement? And then I got to go in and figure out, based on the PDF title, where I'm at. And so you want to make sure that that's labeled, so it's easy for me to know, okay, this is that. And so it's the same on the resume. The other thing that varies a little bit sometimes school to school is the letter of recommendations. We require at least 2. Generally speaking, we'll take up to 4. I'll tell students that this is where you really want to be strategic too, because you don't have to do 4 just for the sake of doing more. More isn't always better. And so what I mean by that is, for example, like let's say you want to do 4 academic ones. That may not be the best, just because after the third, really the second, third one, there's only so many ways a professor could say, they're a great student, they're prepared. So by the time I get to the 4th one, I've pretty much read the same thing over and over again. So it's not really adding anything. It's not contributing anything new. Now, if you have like an academic one, a professional one, maybe you volunteered somewhere, or if you were involved in something else or sports, whatever it may be, and you have that, and everyone's providing a different perspective of you, then that's fine. Or even if you had 2 different jobs, 2 different supervisors, that's perfectly fine. The main thing about letters of recommendation is that we care about the substance more than the title of the person writing the letter. And so I think that's something that students sometimes get caught up in is trying to find like that they feel like it has to be a lawyer or finding someone with the highest title that they can think of. That's not really going to impress us, and it's not going to change how we view in a letter of recommendation. Because if it's someone that they might be a lawyer, or they might have a nice title, but they don't really know you, then it's not going to really help much. It's not going to contribute much to your application versus someone that maybe just was your direct supervisor when you worked at a grocery store, but they worked with you on a regular basis and they know you and they can give me examples of why they think, you're so great or you're so smart or you're trustworthy, reliable. That's going to be a lot more helpful than someone that just used a template and they just copied and pasted your name. And usually they either put the wrong school in there or the wrong program, which I've read plenty of, where they're saying, "Oh, they'll be a great med student." I'm like, all right, well, this is the wrong place that you submitted this application to. So you want to make sure that you're really thinking about who knows you well and who you trust to write a positive letter of recommendation. Because sometimes we do have recommenders that maybe aren't as good of recommenders because they'll say, I'm not sure if they're ready for law school. Some will actually say that they're not ready for law school. So obviously, regardless of how I felt up to that point in your application review, now there's going to be some doubt in there if I was leaning more, towards admitting because, this is the person that you picked to kind of vouch for you. But and if they don't think you're ready, I don't really know you. All I have of you is this. I'm not going to be 100% confident either. So that's where you really want to think about who you trust to write a good letter of recommendation. And then lastly, an addendum. So this is pretty much a space where if there's something in your application or just in general that you want to talk about that doesn't make sense to mention or talk about anywhere else in your application, that's what an addendum is for. So the most common ones that we see are based on like the LSAT, the GPA. Some schools, including us, will require an addendum if you answer yes to any of the character and fitness questions. So the character and fitness questions will usually ask a version of, have you ever been accused or charged with or committed any kind of crime or any kind of academic disciplinary action. So if you answer yes to any of those questions, then you would have to automatically provide an addendum, which is basically an explanation of what happened, like what was it, and what was the outcome of it. But the non-character fitness ones, the most common ones are GPA, LSAT, and so in those, typically what I tell students is because a lot of times students are afraid to include an addendum because they don't want to make it seem like they're making an excuse for something. And what I tell students is there's a difference between making up an excuse and providing context. And so what I mean by that is, let's say for example on the LSAT, the most common ones is like you got sick right before, or a lot of people had tech issues with the remote version. So that happens all the time. Internet crash, the software crash, the proctor interrupted you, anything like that. That's providing context because if you don't tell us that, then there's no way of knowing that that happened to you and that affected your performance. So definitely let us know that because that way, if you take it more than once, which most students do on average, 2 to 3 is what is expected of most applicants. So if you take it again and do a lot better, great. But then we're going to wonder, well, what happened because we get all your scores, and as you cancel them, we're going to be wondering what happened. And so that way you can just let us know, like, I had tech issues, didn't have them the second time, did a lot better because of that. We're like, okay, that makes sense. And we move on. It's no big deal. So that's the difference. Where it becomes more of an excuse is if you just say something general like, I'm just not a good test taker, and that's why I didn't do great. That's kind of vague. It's pretty vague. And so, what we think too is like, well, there's tests in law school. And so if you're not a good test taker, that doesn't give us any confidence that you're going to do well on the test here. And then there's a big test after law school that if you plan on practicing law, you're going to have to take as well. So that's something where you want it to be more tailored. Same with the GPA. Of course, you always want to end it on a positive note. So on the GPA, for example, let's say you had one bad semester or bad year. You typically we see it like first, second year. Maybe you were adjusting, especially if you were a first-year college student, and it took you a while to acclimate to college, or if you had to work while you were an undergrad. That's the other one that is very common. You were working a part-time job or sometimes a full-time job, and you were paying your own way through college, so you weren't necessarily able to 100% just focus on school or do school and extracurriculars we want to know that. Of course, we're going to see it on your resume, but it's good to highlight that in an addendum, so that you make sure that the reader is aware, like, I wasn't just doing school, I was doing all this stuff, and this affected my performance. So that something like that is a lot more helpful than saying something like, I just didn't take my first year seriously, which has happened. I've read that before, so I don't recommend that. Um, the other thing that I'll talk about timing wise is um, rolling admissions is pretty much the standard when it comes to how law schools review applications. And what that means is that law schools will review applications based on when they're completed or when they're submitted. For us, we base it off when it's completed. So let's say, for example, you submit your application um, September 1st when it opens, but then your letters of recommendation and your transcripts don't come in till October 1st. Your application isn't completed until October 1st for us. So that's the date that you'll have, and that's the order that we'll review them in. And so we'll start reviewing applications in October, and we start from September and work our way through. And so that's why when you apply is so important, because the earlier you apply, the more opportunity you have, because schools are much more willing to give opportunities to maybe students that are below the medians or right on the border, on the fence about, for a variety of reasons outside of just numbers. If we think, okay, I think I could go either way with him, admit or wait list, I'm not sure. But if it's early, because we have no idea what the class is looking like, as far as number of deposits, we're much more willing to give an opportunity because we have the availability versus someone that we're not reviewing until March that may be applied in like January or February. And then, we know by that point, we have a lot more deposits. We know what our class is starting to look like. We know how many pending seats we have that based on the people that we've admitted. So the seats are going to be a lot more limited. And so it's going to be a lot more competitive. If you wait, for example, until today, the deadline to apply, it's going to be a lot more competitive than if you would have applied in September. And so that's what rolling admissions really is. And that way it can have a huge impact on your admission opportunities because of how the timing works of when you're reviewed and your application is complete. The last thing I'll talk about is early decision. Service school does it a little bit differently. For us, it is binding. For some schools, it's not. And what I mean by that is if you apply early decision, you're basically saying, if you admit me, I'm committing. And so the way that we get your commitment is once we admit you, you actually sign a contract saying that you're going to withdraw all your other applications and you actually have to pay your deposit when it comes to that. So that's something that we do to try to, in essence, have you commit to us. And so early decision, the first round, the deadline is typically in like beginning of November. The positive thing about that is too is we guarantee you a decision by the end of December. Second round of early decision, the deadline is typically right around the beginning of January. We guarantee you a decision by the end of January. Where early decision is super helpful is if you know, for example, that maybe your numbers aren't the strongest, that's where we're a lot more willing to give some flexibility when it comes to that because um, we know that if we admit you, that you're joining, that you're going to come to, and so that's something that we're a lot more willing to give chances because we know that if you're admitted, you're going to commit. Versus if you're a regular decision, we may just decide instead of admitting to waitlist because there's that risk of if we admit you, you still might choose to go somewhere else. So that's really the benefit of early decision. Where you kind of take a disadvantage is on the other side of things is on the financial aid side, where because we know that you are now committed to Duke, there isn't necessarily an incentive to give you a super high scholarship offer. Schools vary on this when it comes to scholarships. We're not of the mentality that there's a possible that there's some schools say, well, if you're admitted, early decision, be prepared to maybe not get any scholarship. For us, we want to make sure that as many people as we can in our class, including our early decision students, they get something. The amount will vary, but we don't want to kind of for you to be afraid that you're not going to get anything. And so we are I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second, but we are very fortunate that we do both merit and need-based aid so that you're eligible for that as an early decision applicant as well, where you have The disadvantage is that students that are regular decision, because they're going to get other competing offers, they might request a reconsideration for a higher scholarship based on those competing offers. Obviously, you won't since you withdrew your other application, so it'll just be us. So that's where you kind of miss out on that aspect of it. But as far as the initial scholarship offer, it's not going to be like a huge difference between early decision and regular decision when it comes to that piece. And so that's why I tell students, if you're going to do early decision, you really want to think about, is this school one of my top two choices? Because obviously you might not get to your top one. So you do your top two, so that way you might get into your second one. And that's what we have as 2 rounds as well. So you want to make sure that you really think about that and what that school is worth to you financially speaking. And so talking about scholarships, financial aid, our process is pretty straightforward. None of our scholarships have any conditions. Basically, the way it works is once you're admitted, we ask, would you like to be considered for financial aid? Most people say yes. And so from there, we ask, would you like to be considered for merit only or merit and need-based aid? If you're doing merit only, then that's it. You don't have to submit anything else. If you do merit need, we don't use the FAFSA, unlike undergrad. We have our own questionnaire that's a lot more detailed and more in depth. And so we want to get a better assessment of your actual financial situation. And so you fill that out. If you're 28 or older, then, or sorry, younger than 28, then you also have to submit, your parent or legal guardian has to submit their financial information. If you're 28 or older, then you don't. And so that we'll take that information and we'll consider that for the need-based portion of the scholarships. We also do scholarship interviews virtually, and so that's optional for everyone. So even if you're merit only, you can do that. We have some students that decline the interview. I tell everyone to do it because it only helps. It's a great opportunity for not only for you to get to know us, but for us to get to know you a little bit better beyond the paper, kind of get a better sense of, any questions that you might have, any financial situations that may have occurred, that may have changed since the time you applied or since the time you were admitted. You can tell us that there. And it's just a great way to get to know each other. And so I tell students it only helps so to do it. So even though it's optional, but and then for our full tuition scholarship or more to key scholarship, that's really the only way to get it because we don't have a separate process for it. Like there's no separate application, there's no separate interview. That interview in essence serves as the interview for that because when we get together as a committee, if we have a student that we think is someone that could be a good candidate for that, that's when we tell Dean Hoy, who's our Dean of Admissions, Financial Aid and Student Affairs, and then he'll re-review the application and make that final decision of whether that's a student that we're going to offer one of our full tuition scholarships to. So that's another reason why I tell students just do it because you never know. And so that's pretty much how our financial aid process works. I have federal loans, private lenders there, private lenders if needed. That's very, very last resort. Typically, I haven't run into a student that between scholarship and federal student loans, they haven't had enough. Typically, that's more than enough for them to cover not just tuition, but cost of living as well. So you should be good there. But I just listed because it is an option, but I definitely would not recommend doing private loans unless you absolutely have to. And so that's pretty much it when it comes to the presentation side. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen now. And if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put them in the chat, and I'll go ahead and start answering your questions. So Victoria, go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is, damn, I forgot. Sorry. I forgot. Okay. So my question is, okay. So do you know the grading like system at Duke Law? Is it very like non-grading, like a honors pass system, or would you say it's more?
No, so there you get grades. What we don't do is we don't rank our classes.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
But there's a curve, like every law school, they're gonna have a curve, which only helps. Sometimes students are afraid that it's gonna hurt their grade. It's never gonna lower your grade. It's always gonna help. One professor, like I said, I went to a different law school, but he always said, it's like you don't want to see your uncurved grade. And so I think ours, if I'm not mistaken, is like an 87 is the median requirement. So it's kind of high. So it's not like it's like a super hard curve. So what you get as a student is kind of like a median, so a GPA. So like you'll know your grades, your GPA. We just don't do rank until the end, until you graduate, and then your transcript will show it. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Omar?
I had a question about how your international law program worked. That's
Mhm.
just one thing I'm very interested in.
Yeah. So do you mean like our just international classes that we may offer, or the dual degree program that we have?
The degree program.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we have a JDLLM in an international and comparative law. And so basically that one you actually finish within the traditional 3-year JD program. So you're not adding any other time to it like any of the other dual degree programs. So for example, if you wanted to do like a JD MBA, you would have to apply to both a business and a law school separately, and it would add an extra year. The JDLMs don't, you actually finish within the 3 years. And because it's within the law school, there's no separate application. It's just when you submit your application, you select whether you're applying to just the JD program or the JD LLM. And so because you finish it within the 3 years, it's a little bit accelerated. You replace one of your first year spring courses with one of your international studies courses. And then in your second semester, your fall second semester, you take the 1L course that you didn't take in the spring. Usually it's property. And then in the summer, so basically, if you're part of that program, your first summer is in essence planned for you. So because you'll do the summer program in the Netherlands at The Hague for the first part of the summer, and then they have partnerships with a variety of firms, law firms in different countries. And so then you select which program you want to do, and they put you in the firm in that country, and that's where you spend the rest of your summer. And so you're still free to do whatever you need to do or whatever you would like to do in your second semester, as far as like whether you want to do like a summer associate position at a private practice firm, or if you want to do government position. But that first summer is planned for you, and then you have a couple more upper level required courses that are more international law based that you have to take as well. And then clinics wise, you are guaranteed a spot in the international human rights clinic if that's something that you want to do. So as part of the program, you'll be able to do that, just because if you're not part of the program, you would just have to register for it like everyone else. So the clinics for us is just an elective course that you sign up for. So like class registration, the third years will get priority, then the second years will get to do it. So if it's a really popular one and the 3Ls fill it up, as a second year, you might have to wait until your spring semester to be able to enroll, or even into your 3L year, depending on how popular it is. And so if you're in the JDLM program, you don't have to worry about it because you have a guaranteed spot in the International Human Rights Clinic. So that's pretty much how it works when it comes to that aspect of it. Brooklyn, do you have a question as well?
Yeah, hi. Do you have any good tips that you can give us for a good personal statement? Like what to add, what to avoid?
Yeah. The first thing, like with every application and every piece of the application, is read the question or the instructions that they have. Just because that's where law schools vary a lot. Some schools will not have any questions, just whatever you want to write about. Others will have specific questions. You obviously want to make sure that you answer those questions. For us, it's pretty broad. It's just more so like just tell us about yourself, your experiences. If you want to include white law, you can talk about that there. But of course, we have the optional essay where you can kind of develop that a little bit more. For us, it's more so just trying to get to know you and kind of the experiences that you've had that will contribute to the community here. Of course, white law is often a big part of that, so that will also help us kind of give a better understanding, especially if you don't want to necessarily write an optional essay, or if you want your optional essay to be more focused on the Duke portion of it, then you can incorporate your white law there as well. What I would recommend, the biggest thing I tell students is just be yourself, like be authentic. And I know that's very vague in general, but it's because it's hard for us to tell you what to write about because it's your personal statement. I can't really tell you, you know, which specific experiences you want to discuss, or if a person inspired you, that's up to you to talk about. What I do warn students about though is if you decide to speak about maybe a specific incident or a series of events that inspired you, or a person that may have inspired you to pursue law, be careful with not spending all of it or most of your personal statement on just that, because that's really going to limit how much we know about you. And this is really for the most part, the only way that we get to know you, because you're really not going to get to speak with everyone that's going to review your application. So this is all they have of who you are as a person and why you want to do this. And so you really want to take advantage of that space. And it is a limited amount of space. Some schools are really hard, have a really hard cutoff. And so they'll say, 2 pages, and we're not reading after that second page. For us, we have a 2 to 3 page range. And so typically, generally speaking, you don't want to go over 3 pages anyway. But because you have such a limited time, you really want to maximize that space as much as possible. So you want to be careful that you're not writing too much on just that specific incident. It's fine to start out that way, but then build on it and move on from it and talk about, and this is what I've done in undergrad, and this is what I've done here to help prepare me for law school. Or if it's a person, it's great that they inspired you, like if it was a family member, for example. But then if you spend the majority of the time talking about them, I'm going to end up knowing a lot more about them than I do about you. And so I'll be like, they sound like a great law school candidate, but I don't know about you. So, that's kind of the focus that you want to make sure you're having, that this is about you and why you want to do this. So I would say just make sure that have that balance, and just be careful with talking about someone else or the specific moment in your life too much. You want to make sure that it flows. Another thing is, just don't feel like you have to use like the fanciest words, or I guess what do they call it, SAT caliber words that you can think of. Because you want, again, talking about the time that we spend reading, we don't, if I have to like think about, was that word used properly, or like, do I have to look up this word because I've never seen it every few sentences? That's not helpful. Just, it's fine. Of course you want to maintain a professional tone, but that doesn't mean, sometimes students will feel like they got a thesaurus and looked up, what's the most complicated word I can think of for this simple saying. You don't need that either. You want to make sure that it's readable, that it flows, that it makes sense. Sometimes I get like philosophy papers. I don't need that either. I wasn't a philosophy major for a reason. And so you want to make sure that you're careful with being too academic, if that makes sense as well. So that's the biggest thing that I would say. The biggest piece of advice I would give. I'll send it to Victoria. She can email it to you all. I've done a couple panels, but I did a series with a few colleagues from different law schools. And one of the topics we talked about was personal statements. So I'll make sure you all get that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Catherine? Katrin, which do you prefer?
Both is okay.
Okay.
Either or is good. But first of all, I'd just like to say thank you for coming and taking the time out of your day to speak to us. I can speak on behalf of all the e-board members to say that we're very grateful for that opportunity. I have two sets of questions. One is personal, and then the other one is on behalf of another e-board member who couldn't make it today. So we'll just start off with that question, which is, what is the difference between a well-rounded student and a well-diverse student? And then my personal question is, I would love to have just a little bit more detail on your guys' wrongful conviction clinic, as well as your criminal defense clinic as well too. And if a student were to apply to those during their time at Duke Law, what are like the requirements and what are kind of the career opportunities that come out of being in those clinics as well?
Yeah. So the first question, what is well-rounded and well-diverse was the term you used. I mean, I don't see necessarily like a difference when it comes to that, because everyone has, what I say is every student, every person is a multifaceted individual. You all have different interests, things that you want to be a part of. And so it's really more so making the most out of the time that you have, because that's where, I mentioned earlier the holistic process where it really comes into play, because we don't compare people to each other. When I'm reading an application, I'm just looking at you. I'm just seeing what you've done with the time that you've had. The other thing is we don't look at people, evaluate everyone the same, because not everyone has the same life experience. If you are someone that had to work while you were an undergrad, or if you're married, or if you have kids, or if you're taking care of a family member or a friend, that's going to be very different than if you're just doing school. So we're going to expect different things. So like, obviously, if you're just doing school, there's really no reason to not have any extracurriculars. Like you didn't do anything, versus if you're working, obviously I'm not going to expect you to be able to do, be the president of this, be on the executive board of that, because you have other responsibilities that you need to meet. And so that, I think, the well-rounded definition depends, to start getting used to the lawyer answer of it depends, is person to person and individually based. And so what I say is, based on the availability, the resources that you have, do the best you can with what you have. Of course, a lot of times students will ask, like, do I have to have some kind of like law firm internship or experience? You don't. There's no prerequisites for law school when it comes to that kind of stuff for a reason, is because not everyone has the opportunity to do that. If you do, great, it's super helpful for you, because it might give you something to talk about in your personal statement, or it might help you figure out what you want to do, what you don't want to do after law school or during law school. But it's not necessarily going to be like, oh, this person has a law firm internship, this person doesn't, we're going to admit the person with the law firm internship. That's not how we operate. It's more so what you have access to. So I think a more well-rounded applicant is the one that takes advantage of the opportunity that they do have within that. But of course, still maintaining a strong like GPA, of course, LSAT, because you don't want to sacrifice your performance in the classroom just to put on more extracurriculars on your resume. Because sometimes we'll have that. We'll see students that have like 20 different organizations that they were a part of, and they volunteered and they did this, but then their GPA suffered because of that. And that's the balance, where, because what we're looking for too is, does the person have at least started developing the time management skill? Because I talked about how you have so many things going on once you start law school. We're starting to look at, can this person handle all the demands of law school? Because law school isn't just class. You're doing student organizations, pro bono projects, clinics, you're looking for jobs, you're networking. So we want to start seeing that in the applicant. Can this person handle the demands of law school? And that's really what makes someone well-rounded. And so, of course, diversity can mean so many things. So that's something that we just comes included in what we look and how we look at a person. So that's, I think, the best answer I can give you for both when it comes to that. And as far as clinics goes, so our clinics are just elective courses. So you just register for them like any other course. So there isn't like a separate application process for it. Wrongful conviction. So that one is interesting because they're actually the only one that isn't in the law school building. They're actually with our center, Wilson Center for Science and Justice, off campus. They're a little bit closer to downtown. Just ease of access to working with clients. And that one's actually kind of like ongoing, more long-term, just because a lot of the cases that they're working with, the clients have been incarcerated for decades, oftentimes, unfortunately. So they're going through files, through cases work to see, what can be done. They're also looking at potential new clients, seeing, if there's anyone else that they can help. So they work a lot with nonprofit organizations in the state, and to see, what opportunities are there. And so you as a student, you're working on the cases, but it's also about client interaction and relationship building, because they need that too. And that you're kind of serving as the update of, this is what's going on in your case, this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on, because that's super helpful to them as well. So you kind of serve both purposes there when it comes to that. Normally you have about 10 to 15 people in those clinics as well. And you do have the opportunity for all clinics, if there's a clinic that you really like that you just want to be a part of, you do have that opportunity to do it for multiple semesters and not just one. The criminal defense clinic, basically we partner with the Durham County Public Defender's Office, and you're actually taking on cases. So in North Carolina, after you've completed 2 semesters of law school, under the supervision of a licensed attorney, you can actually practice law. And so that's basically what you do, because they need help. And so they put you straight to work in the public defender's office. Obviously, they're going to ease you into it. They're going to do more misdemeanor type of work. And then if you decide to do it multiple semesters, they'll, kind of work your way up there. But for the most part, students that do that type of work are the ones that want to get into some kind of, whether it's a state public defender or federal public defender. Those are the types of job opportunities that clinics will help you with to get that skill set in it. Because if you're applying to those types of positions straight out of law school, they really like it for you to already have experienced that type of environment before. But there are some students that know, like, they're going to go to private practice, but maybe sometime down the line they might do that. So they just want to do that while they're in law school too. So that's pretty much what it works. And I saw last question in the chat. Omar, sorry I didn't call you earlier, but he said go more detail about the international human rights clinics, because it sounds like something you would be really interested about. So basically, that one's interesting because it's one of the few that we have that most clinics, like the criminal defense clinic and the wrongful conviction clinic, you have a client, you have a case that you're working on, and then once you're done with that client or that case, you move on, you have more clients' cases. This one's actually more policy driven. So there isn't specific clients that you're working for. It's actual policy that you're working on, that you're working with different organizations on. One of the directors of the clinic works at the UN. She splits her time. So she's also kind of brings you on to what she's working on policy wise there. They usually do a trip to either England or New York to the UN headquarters there. So you do have that opportunity as well as part of that. And so sometimes both. I think last year they went to both. So you do have that opportunity to go on those trips. So it's a really great, unique perspective because it is a little different from what you typically do in law school, which is more policy based instead of more like client based work. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. Anything else? Or you said that was the last question. So anything else?
Yeah, because I don't want to take more of your time. I'm so
No, you're
sorry.
good.
Thank you so much for agreeing
Yeah.
to do this. I like love this so much. This was amazing information session. And is it okay? Do you want to take a picture, the Zoom pic?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, just
Yeah.
let me know.
Okay. So everyone put your cameras on if you want to be in the picture. If not, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna stop the recording.